Thank you. I must say I'm honored to stand here in front of you all to share my thoughts on doping with respect to the perspective of financial crimes, which I also must say is not an instead of perspective, but an additional perspective. But first, I just must emphasize, I'll share my views, which do not necessarily reflect the views of my employer. And I'll start with a reality check, because in the beginning, sport was a game and doping was cheating. And it still is, but today it is more than that. Today's sport also is a huge financial industry, including the possibility of huge financial gains. And with this large amounts of money follows greed. And you should never underestimate the power of greed. When the financial incentives get as strong as they are in sports today, the knowledge, competence, and help needed to beat the system will be available. It will be for sale. So you'll keep finding well-organized groups of people with significant resources and a high level of competence who are able to beat the system. And why? Because when it becomes financially rational to invest a lot of time and a lot of money in finding the best way to beat the system, they will. And that leads me to my first point. The power of greed that follows such large sums of money is too strong for any private organization to battle alone. So I'm a bit sorry to say, but in my opinion, it's naive to believe that the sport federations are capable of detecting the best cheaters, and it's naive to believe that exclusion from sport alone will have the necessary deterrent effect. So the sports federation need to accept they need help. Additionally, the authorities need to treat this as a financial crime. Why? Because any doper receiving any money as a result of participating in sports receives money they are not entitled to. And if the financial gains from sports are left as a lawless part of our economy, overseen only by sports federation, we have a fox in a henhouse situation, rigged to attract criminal elements and representing a temptation to all people with a weakness for money. We, and then including the authority, must realize that normal and foreseeable consequences will be misconduct and crime like fraud, bribery, corruption, and medical experiments on humans, to mention some. This is also a problem for our society, which need to be treated the same way as any other kind of financial crime, with police methods to detect the misconduct and a real threat of deterrent punishments, applicable to all athletes and all of their accomplices, including the trainers, doctors, nurses, representatives of sports federations, clubs, teams, and others. So in my opinion, the first prerequisite to effectively prevent doping in sport, to provide a realistic prospect to secure fairness in sport, is that the sports federation accept their need for help and the authority to accept their part of the responsibility. And I think there is truth in the words of Dr. Rashenko's lawyer, Jim Walden, when he said, we could have a real change if people think they could actually go to prison for this. My next issue is in formality, is in the law. In order to treat this as a financial crime, we need the correct set of criminal rules. Rules shaped by the distinctive features, the true nature of this particular type of financial misconduct. And what are these distinctive features? Firstly, for those who dope, any use of illegal methods to enhance performance equals disqualification. So any money dopers receive under the assumption of being clean is money they have no entitlement to. And this alone, in my opinion, should be enough to qualify as a financial crime. Secondly, for those who don't dope, they are victims. The dopers' financial benefits are gained on the expenses of the honest participants, depriving them of their right for fair sport, and it harms the integrity of sport. This should also be enough to qualify as a financial crime. Just one of these reasons, in my opinion, should be enough to make this a financial crime, but today it's not always enough. And that leads me to the third distinctive side of doping. When analyzing doping in this perspective, there is one basic and important question we have to ask. Why is it so much money to gain from performing well in sports? Where do the financial gain actually come from? And they come from the general public, the spectators, the fans, all followers of sports. They represent the most important financial value. And it's mainly through modern business model in sport that public interest is transformed into financial gains. First for the sponsors, sports federations, clubs, teams, and others, and then from them, a part of the total financial gain is being shared with the athlete. In a financial crime perspective, this should be decisive. When the general public in reality represent the financial value in sports, the legality versus crime question should be defined by the relationship between the general public and the ones who benefit from the deception, and not defined by the relationship between the ones sharing the gains. And one problem today, from my perspective, is that the common fraud regulation is shaped with other situations in mind, for more traditional situations, focusing on the relationship between the one receiving the money and the one paying the money, with two key questions. Was the one paying the money deceived, and did he suffer any loss? With regard to doping fraud cases, this interpretation would only focus on the relationship between those sharing the gains from the deception, not the actual victims of the deception. And the prosecutor in the case against Jan Ulrich illustrated this point accurately when he explained the lack of criminal prosecution for fraud by stating that everybody seemed to have known. And when everybody knows, no one gets deceived. I guess by everybody, he meant the sponsors, the cycling federation, and others involved in the sport. The one paying the money apparently knew. But the prosecutor's statement is inaccurate. Why? Because we, the general public, we did not know. And in my perspective, that is the important distinction. Because even if everybody paying the money knew, we, the general public, were victims of deception. And isn't it a paradox, and in a way quite offensive paradox, that a financial crime becomes legal because the one paying the money knowingly benefited from the crime himself? And what if it's true that everybody involved knew? What does that actually mean? In a financial crime perspective, that should have meant that many others be held responsible together with the athlete. It should definitely not excuse the crime and define it as legal behavior. So I think we need a set of rules specially shaped for this type of financial crime. And we should make sure we get a regulation that reflects the true nature of doping as a financial crime, which is able to hold all athletes and all accomplices accountable, regardless of who they are, how numerous they are, or how important they are. Well, I think that was my 10 minutes, so I really hope you appreciate these thoughts from a financial crime perspective. Many thanks for your attention.